if any of you ever doubted whether or not the mission is going to be accomplished, it's going to happen. It's just absolutely going to happen. It's just a matter, are we going to live long enough to enable us to benefit from that technology? Now, Happy New Year. And I'm not saying that from a calendar change standpoint. I'm talking about a study published right around December 28th, and it got into the media right around the beginning of January. This was a study done at the Buck Institute where they were able to elongate the lifespan of the C. elegans model of aging by 500%. And in doing so, and this is the first time I've ever seen a credentialed scientist discuss this or describe it in public at all. He said the equivalency in human lifespan, if we can do this in humans, would be 400 to 500 years. Never seen that in public by a credentialed scientist or even a layperson suggesting that the lifespan potential of humans could be increased to 400 to 500 years based on what has already happened in a study in the C. elegans model. Now, what they did was introduce several different interventions, but they happen to be what you're doing already. You're inhibiting mTOR, the mechanistic target of rapamycin. And you're doing that by taking metformin. You're doing that by intermittent fasting, calorie restriction. You're doing it by boosting your AMPK to suppress your mTOR, or you're taking rapamycin directly along with calorie restriction, intermittent fasting. You're suppressing the mTOR pathway. For most people, it's too high. You're also simultaneously improving insulin signaling, insulin sensitivity. You're doing that with metformin, with intermittent fasting, calorie reduction, maybe even rapamycin. You're already doing what extended lifespan in these animal models in a huge, huge way. And what they did is simply combined the two. They combined the insulin signaling pathway enhancement through some gene alteration and the mTOR inhibition, and they were able to extend the lifespan of the C. elegans in a way that made international headline news. And this is a human translation of how we may be able to accomplish this ourselves, not to make it to 400 to 500 years, but to live a lot longer. One of our research analysts reviewed the paper, and he said, well, here's what we might be able to do. It's up here on the screen right now, but it basically talks about intermittent fasting, which is what I've been doing for the last couple years. I typically go 14 to 18 or more hours every day without eating anything. Some black coffee, some tea, some water, and that's it. Intermittent fasting, and then I reduce my total calorie intake, and I'll probably be starting on rapamycin very soon. I'm already doing so many mTOR inhibiting type of therapies, I don't want to overdo it, and no one wants to overdo it. But between using rapamycin and intermittent fasting in a proper way, we might be able to benefit in the way that these animals did. Now, George Church in 2015 made a rather bold prediction, but after what you heard Liz Peritz just talk about, it's not so bold anymore, because he's involved in gene modification therapy in a way that he believes by year 2030 he will have a cure for biological aging, and it may even happen sooner. But to put this in perspective, this is a study published in November in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And the objective was, could they use a single treatment, a single implementation of gene-modifying therapy and simultaneously treat a whole lot of age-related diseases? Would this have an effect? And bear in mind, if you only reduce the risk of, let's say, heart disease and the patient dies of cancer later on, well, you really haven't accomplished much. Well, look what they did. One single combination gene therapy, and they were able to produce these types of results. A 58% increase in cardiac function. And guess what? We get older, our heart muscle does not pump nearly as strong, as robust as it did in youth. And, well, every year in this country, 300,000 Americans die of congestive heart failure. So this one single therapy, if that were given to a heart failure patient, would save their lives. But they went way beyond that. They were able to show a 38% reduction in the marker of aortic vascular disease, and I believe that also includes aortic stenosis, very common problem with with aging people. 73% in reduction in kidney atrophy. And guess what? If we're over 60 years of age, we've got a decline in our renal function. Some people have chronic kidney failure. It then progresses to a point where they need dialysis. I can't wait till those dialysis centers disappear. When we can use a gene therapy to regenerate our renal function, we don't have to worry about facing a dialysis procedure 3 times a week. And then the fourth, this is just one therapy, one gene intervention done once. It was able to completely reverse obesity and diabetes. Wow, all of that. 2 months ago published, an absolutely remarkable amount of data. Now, what's so important for everyone in this room to realize, why you showed up tonight, is reaching the critical mass. Liz Parrish and I spoke at a conference in Palm Beach on December 8th called the Confidential Cures. It was put on by Dr. Al Sears, and we put on our presentations. Now, Newt Gingrich was also part of the speaker group. He was part of that group. Now, I don't know if Newt Gingrich knew anything about the prospect of human age reversal before this conference, but he sat there and listened to different speakers talk, and guess what? This is December 8th, by the way, is when we had this conference. Less than a month later, this is an influential person, bear in mind. When we start to influence people, he's in Fox News, January 5th, less than a month later, talking about the prospect of human age reversal. And this is why talking to people you know about the fact that aging is something that is controllable today with interventions like metformin and restricting our calorie intake, we can slow it down today. But when you have influential people talking about age reversal, you start to build that critical mass. Critical mass is what's going to enable this age reversal technology, be it whatever therapy works the best, to manifest in our lifetime. Michael Rose, he's considered one of the foremost experts in animal aging research. He's published numerous papers. He predicts within 100 years, physicians will be able to keep people alive indefinitely. This concept of immortality is garnering widespread media coverage. The scientists are talking about it. We are winning this war against biological aging on the front of the public relations. We're getting great public relations from credentialed people. Brand new magazine, first publishing this month on immortality. The Immortalist magazine is launched by Ira Pastor. He's been a long time immortalist. He emails me all the time with new findings. I email him back. So he's put together a magazine launching in January and a book on immortality. This writer went up to Silicon Valley and interviewed the billionaires who are putting lots and lots of money into age reversal research. They are funding research to keep themselves and the rest of humanity from perishing from the horrific consequences of biological aging. This is all coming out in January 2020. These studies I'm talking about just occurred, were just published over the last couple months. It is absolutely remarkable what we are seeing transpire before our eyes. And you may know the Galileo program. That's like the 60 Minutes of German-speaking Europe. They were here a couple years ago filming, and they reran it the first week of January. And once again, my email box filled up from all of our European supporters saying, "Hey, Bill, we're seeing you on TV." And I responded, let them know that, well, that was actually played a year ago, but they rebroadcast that. So people in Europe got to see what we're doing and what I'm doing to slow down my rate of aging and what we're advocating for science to do to make the process go a lot faster. So these are the people who I cannot imagine are in the predicament they're in with the kind of wealth that they have. They're multi-billionaires and they're dead. And they probably did very little to prevent that. Typically, billionaires go to the most high-end, conventional medical settings they can find to treat a medical problem. That's what they do. And they get good conventional medical care. Well, at some point, that care doesn't work anymore, and they die. And Liz Parrish, she's been struggling now for 5 to 6 years or longer, a long time, to raise a relatively small amount of money. Someone with this kind of money, he should have been having a team of PhDs. I mean, he can afford it. A team of PhDs investigating everything out there, and if something looks interesting, we'll just write a check. Because right now, he doesn't have any money. He's dead. Someone else is enjoying over $18 billion. And I make a big deal about this because it's almost a crime against humanity and against oneself to have the kind of money that these individuals do, and they're very generous for the most part. They're philanthropic, but they'll just write a $100 million check to a university to have their name put on a building, and the university uses it for all kinds of reasons, but they don't target their donations in a way where if you put $10 million into what Liz is doing, wow, something could happen really, really fast, because all she's doing is accelerating the research as opposed to putting a name on a new building being put up in the name of some billionaire. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, this individual, the founder of QVC, we all don't know what that is, I think. It's on TV all the time. He was very intuitive to put that together, the whole concept. He was worth over $20 billion, and he dies at the age of 88 of congestive heart failure. And I really doubt that he utilized a technique that we've been talking about for the last couple of years, senolytic therapy, to remove the senescent cells in a damaged heart to enable progenitor cells to induce a regenerative effect. I doubt that he considered that therapy. I've been advocating it now for the last 12 to 15 months, that if someone is having a problem with heart failure, they're no longer responding to therapy, consider senolytic therapy. Heart failure, chronic heart failure, it's at an epidemic level because guess what? We know people are living longer. And as they live longer, their heart muscle degenerates, or they have myocardial infarctions, heart attacks. Part of their heart muscle dies. That weakens their heart muscle, so they wind up having an inability sometimes to even walk across a room without being out of breath. So it's a slow, progressive, degenerative condition that can be dealt with. It can be dealt with, and the conventional medical people have done a good job with it, along with the alternative medical people. But what happens is the therapies eventually stop working, and these people start to die. So what we need to do is simply regenerate their aging heart. Sounds easy, except there's a barrier. And that barrier is the accumulated burden of senescent cells in their heart muscle that disables the ability of progenitor cells to restore healthy cardiac function. Senescent cells literally block the effect of cardiac progenitor cells from producing functional cells that would then rejuvenate the heart muscle. So what we're advocating, if you know people with congestive heart failure, I'll show you the protocol at the end of this presentation, consider a round of dasatinib and quercetin. Do that 2 to 3 weeks in a row and carefully measure baseline and follow up and see within a couple months if cardiac function doesn't improve. People with systolic heart failure can easily measure that through a test called ejection fraction. People with diastolic heart failure, there's other ways to measure improvements, including your ability to walk across a room without getting out of breath. But the senescent cell removal is probably the barrier that's preventing regenerative therapies from working. And senescent cells, as we know, they accumulate in our body as we age. They emit chronic inflammatory signals, and how they damage the heart and other tissues in the body is that these senescent cells, they emit protein-degrading enzymes. So you've got an aged heart, it's had maybe some infarctions from coronary artery blockage or other reasons, viral infections. There's a number of reasons for a heart to fail, and you've got all these senescent cells in the heart that are precluding the ability for that heart muscle to regenerate, including emitting protein-degrading enzymes that harm and damage and kill nearby cells. So we've got to get rid of those senescent cells, absolutely critical. And in doing so, we believe the progenitor cells that are still around are going to be able to regenerate the heart muscle. Bone marrow, that's where mesenchymal stem cells, hematopoietic stem cells, that's where they originate, and they move into the tissues throughout the body, and they set up little colonies to produce progenitor cells that can then do two things. They can either self-renew into a healthy young progenitor cell, or they can differentiate into a fresh functional cell. People with heart failure, they don't have a whole lot of fresh functional cells left. The heart muscle is weakening. And as long as those senescent cells are in the way, no matter what you do, you give people stem cell therapy, you give people therapy to regenerate the stem cells, those senescent cells are going to overcome that problem, in our opinion. So this is what we suggest people consider doing in order to get those progenitor cells in the heart muscle working again. And of course, we've been talking about this for years. We do still have stem cells. Every one of us has stem cells in our bodies. The problem is they're getting old like our functional cells. So we boost AMPK. Do that by intermittent fasting. Do it by calorie restriction. Metformin, suppressed mTOR-C1. Now, rapamycin does that directly, but by boosting AMPK, you indirectly suppress mTOR. Lots of ways to replenish NAD and activate sirtuin proteins. Again, calorie restriction, resveratrol, a number of different factors that almost everyone in this congregation has been using for decades. You are helping to sustain stem cell function within your own body, whether you know it or not. So we know that senescent cells block the ability to rejuvenate aging, degenerated heart muscles. We know that, but we also know how to get rid of that. The dasatinib and quercetin. That combination is currently the gold standard. Now we're looking at other senolytic compounds like fisetin, evaluating them, but we already know that the dasatinib and the quercetin works. But this is a study that I put up here a couple months ago, and it talks about if you're over 70 years of age, half of your cardiac progenitor cells, they're senescent. Wow, half of them are senescent. How would you expect your heart muscle to ever repair itself? It's not. It's not unless you get rid of those senescent cells. Good news came out about a year ago where they did some research in people with pulmonary fibrosis. They were able to see some good results there, but they also were able to see heart failure reversed in the animal model in response to senolytic therapy. Senolytic therapy that we're suggesting people who have heart failure and want to be a little adventurous, try some senolytic therapy, let us know how it works. The scientists believe this could be a therapy of the future, but with 300,000 people dying every year of heart failure in this country alone, that delay every day, every week, every month results in huge numbers of people needlessly dying. So these findings on senolytics are consistent. We continue to see new evidence. I just got a paper sent in today that was published a few days ago indicating how the removal of senescent cells could help with certain female reproductive disorders. Absolutely incredible what's happening in the field of medicine. But we go back to the founder of QVC, worth over $20 billion. Now, why didn't he write Liz Parrish a $10 million check to accelerate her research? I don't know why, because $10 million, you understand when you have that kind of money, that's kind of what you earn every couple days in interest income. And then if he's still with QVC, he's making more than that. And so every year he lived, he may have accumulated another $2 to $3 billion. And this is what the billionaires, some are investing money and donating. We highlight those. But most of them still aren't doing this. And they're letting themselves needlessly die prematurely, and they're letting the rest of us, unfortunately, suffer too as we try to raise money. So the protocol, we've put this up on the board many times. It's simple. Dasatinib is a leukemia drug. It's a chemo drug, and I know that scares people, but we're talking about giving a dose of dasatinib that's a little bit higher than what a leukemia patient might take every day, just one time, week 1, and then repeat it week 2, along with a very high dose of quercetin. Dasatinib has specific effects against senescent cells. It's a very specific senolytic, but by itself it doesn't work nearly as well as opposed to putting it with quercetin, which of course is an over-the-counter dietary supplement. So the combination of the dasatinib and quercetin is the current gold standard for senolytic therapies, and it's being recognized in the conventional medical journals. JAMA, the American Medical Association, they believe senolytics may be a medical treatment. It may treat and reverse multiple chronic diseases. We got to do that, by the way. If we cure kidney failure and a person dies of a heart attack a couple years later, we haven't accomplished much. But again, the major medical journals are recognizing that aging is a reversible process. New England Journal of Medicine, just about 4 months ago, talking about senolytics being able to potentially reverse aging in people. We're getting the kind of recognition that we've long sought. But it doesn't do this individual any good. He's worth $1.5 billion. He died of a problem, lymphoma. Now, they're curing about 70% of the non-Hodgkin's lymphomas, but nonetheless, a number of people still perish. And I don't think he understood the concept of BCL2 inhibition. BCL2 inhibitors, and BCL2 stands for B-cell lymphoma. B-cell lymphoma inhibitor. So when you take dasatinib, you are inhibiting the BCL2 protein. And in doing so, you are not only getting rid of senescent cells, as a cancer patient, you may get some specific benefits. And if these people who have a lot of money would just look at the scientific literature, they'd be telling their doctors, prescribe me some dasatinib. I'll go out and get my courses on my own, and I'm going to try this to see if I can't augment whatever conventional therapy you're prescribing for me. Because I think a lot of people dying from these hematological malignancies, they're doing it needlessly. They don't have to die, but they're also not looking beyond the scope of just the mainstream people. Paul Allen, founder of Microsoft, worth over $26 billion, and he dies of lymphoma. Can you imagine if I had anywhere near his money and I was diagnosed with lymphoma, what I would be doing? You hire a team of PhDs, okay? That's your filter, because there's going to be all kind of people saying I can cure it with this and that. Most of it doesn't work. Your PhDs are your filter. You pay them a decent amount of money, and you invite people to submit their proposals for what could potentially save your life. And I doubt that any of these people did any of that. They just don't think outside the box. I have yet to see a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal where some billionaire says, I'm going to pay a lot of money for anyone who can extend my life just 1 year. You know, I'll pay you $5–10 million if you have a therapy, and then you run that approach through your team of PhDs, and maybe 100, 200 people are going to say, do this, do that, and 2 of those have potential. And you do both of them, and wow, you live an extra couple years. So you start running that ad again, saying, let's get some more ideas in here. I've never seen that happen. You can believe when I get some problem, you're going to see a lot of ads out there, because I'll be looking for a lot of creative ideas and run it by my team of PhDs and MDs to find out what may really work. So we've got an individual who died recently with a lot of money from a condition that I'm not even sure he pursued all of the alternative approaches. So a lot of people are using Coenzyme Q10 to slow the progression of heart failure. It can reverse it to some degree, but at some point it doesn't continue working. Unfortunately, those senescent cells are building up, and no matter what you do, the good medications that are out there for heart failure, a lot of good nutrients, the hormone replacement, all that stuff, it works for a while, but eventually heart just gives out. Heart just gives out. So I'll conclude the service with just a long quote. Leigh von Hoek, the father of microbiology. I mean, he did so much research for no other purpose than to satisfy his curiosity and then disseminate that information to other scientists who eagerly look forward to getting his drawings of how things looked under a microscope. It was an incredible amount of work he did, but that led then to the fact that we have these microorganisms that are actually pathogens in many cases, and then antibiotics were developed, and you look at how many people have been saved. Wow. Hundreds of billions or more because of an individual who's just willing to use his curiosity, his intellect, and his willingness to disseminate his findings to other people, as I'm doing on a stage, as Liz Parrish just did on a stage with that fantastic presentation. That really concludes my presentation for tonight, and I appreciate the crowd, a nice group here tonight.